You ever try to fix a problem only to find out you actually made it worse? Or maybe you watch a simple solution somehow create this whole cascade of new, unexpected issues. Well, if that sounds familiar, you've slammed right into the limits of traditional thinking. Today, we're going to dive into a really powerful alternative, systems thinking. Yeah, we have all been there. You roll out this smart, direct solution to a really complex problem, and it just backfires? Suddenly you've got a whole new set of issues you never even saw coming. Now, this isn't necessarily a sign that you had a bad solution. It's a classic symptom of wrestling with a complex system. So that begs the real question, right? Why do our most logical, well-intentioned fixes sometimes fail so spectacularly? Well, the answer isn't in the individual pieces of the problem. It's in how we're looking at the problem itself. And it all comes down to two really different ways of thinking. Okay, so on one side, you've got reductionist thinking. This is how most of us are trained to think, right? You take a big, messy problem, you break it down into smaller, manageable parts, and then you fix each part by itself. And look, it's super powerful for detailed technical work. But it has a huge blind spot. It can miss the bigger picture. And that is exactly where systems thinking comes in. It zooms out. It focuses not on the parts themselves, but on that whole web of relationships and interactions between them. You see, just breaking things down doesn't always work because modern challenges are, well, they're messy. Nothing exists in a neat little box. There's this deep interdependence where a tiny change in one area can cause massive ripple effects everywhere else. These systems are dynamic. They're always changing. You've got all these different stakeholders with competing goals, all pulling in different directions, and then you get this wild thing called emergent behavior. These are outcomes you just cannot predict by looking at the individual parts alone. So if breaking things down isn't enough, what's the alternative? We have to learn to zoom out. We need a totally new way of seeing, one that helps us understand the entire picture, not just the individual pixels. At its heart, systems thinking is a really simple but profound shift in focus. Instead of asking, what's wrong with this one piece, we start asking, how does this piece connect to everything else? It's the difference between asking, what's wrong with this car's engine, and asking, how does this engine's performance affect the entire transportation system of the city? See the difference? This quote right here just gets straight to the heart of it. I mean, think about it. You could have a team with the most brilliant, talented people in the world, right? But if their patterns of interaction, their communication, their trust, their coordination, if that's all messed up, the team is going to fail. It's the relationships, not just the components, that drive the final outcome. So how do we actually start seeing all these invisible connections? Well, we need a toolkit of core concepts. You can think of it like the secret language that all systems speak. And let's start with the most fundamental one of all. First up, the system boundary. This is really just the frame we decide to draw around a problem. What's in, what's out. And this one decision, it's absolutely critical because it defines what we pay attention to and maybe more importantly, what we ignore. Think about a problem you're dealing with right now. Where have you kind of instinctively drawn that line? Just look at this example. If you define your system narrowly as just the aircraft itself, you're focused on engineering, on technical specs. But what happens if you widen that boundary to include the entire air travel system? Whoa. Suddenly you're dealing with airports, weather, human factors, economics. It's the same reality, but a different boundary means you're solving a completely different problem. But, defining the box is just step one. Next, we have to understand the dynamics inside that boundary. And that brings us to feedback loops. These are the engines of change inside any system. A feedback loop is basically any circular process where the result of an action feeds back and influences the next action. This is the hidden wiring that makes everything tick, driving all the behavior over time. And they basically come in two main flavors. You've got reinforcing loops, which are amplifiers. Think of a viral video, right? More views lead to more shares, which lead to an exponential explosion of even more views. It's that classic snowball effect. Then, on the other side, you have balancing loops. These are the stabilizers. Your thermostat at home is a perfect example. If the room gets too hot, it cuts the heat. Too cold, it turns it back on. It's constantly working to counteract change and keep things stable. Now, when all these different feedback loops start interacting with each other, something genuinely amazing happens. It's called emergence. And this is where the whole becomes greater than, or at least profoundly different from, the sum of its parts. Emergent properties are behaviors you could just never predict by studying the individual pieces in isolation. And I mean it. Emergence is everywhere. A single bird following a few simple rules has no idea it's part of a flock, creating these beautiful coordinated patterns in the sky. A single driver doesn't create a traffic jam, but the interactions of thousands of them absolutely do. And a company's culture, that's not written down in a manual. It emerges from the thousands of tiny daily interactions between all its people. Okay, so these concepts are fascinating, right? But how do they actually translate from insight into action? How can we apply this way of seeing things to solve real-world problems more effectively? Well, this approach gives us a direct answer to some of our toughest challenges. So if you're constantly fighting unintended consequences, systems thinking tells you to go look for the hidden feedback loops that are causing them. If you're juggling competing objectives, it forces you to map out all the different stakeholder needs. Plagued by integration failures, it helps you finally see those invisible interdependencies that the old way of thinking just misses. Ultimately, adopting this mindset just helps you build better things. For instance, by understanding the entire system, you can start to anticipate how a change in one department might totally affect another. And that lets you design strategies and products that are way more resilient to unexpected shocks and far more adaptive in a world that's just constantly changing. So as we start to wrap up here, it is so important to understand that this isn't about learning one specific diagram or some rigid new method. It's so much more than a tool. It's a fundamental shift in your perspective. It's really about adopting a new orientation, a disciplined practice of seeing the whole picture. It's a lens that you can apply to literally anything in your life, from navigating your career to improving your community to trying to understand the huge global challenges we all face. It's all about seeking out the connections that truly matter. So I'll just leave you with this one question. Think about the biggest, most stubborn challenge that you are facing right now. Now ask yourself, what invisible patterns, what hidden relationships might be driving that entire situation? The answer might not be in the pieces you can see, but in the connections you can't. And finding them, that could change everything.